Hello, and welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America, where each episode we bring you a new interview with one of the film industry's top directors, conducted by one of their peers. You can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or our SoundCloud page at soundcloud.com/thedirectorscut. This episode takes us behind the scenes of director Marc Abraham's biopic, I Saw the Lights. The film charts the rise and fall of legendary country western singer and songwriter Hank Williams, played by Tom Hiddleston. His fame had tragic effects on his personal life and relationship with his wife, Audrey, played by Elizabeth Olsen, and his tumultuous personal life served as fuel for his acclaimed songwriting. Following a recent screening of the film at the DGA Theater in Los Angeles, Mr. Abraham spoke with Ant-Man director Peyton Reed about the challenges he faced while making I Saw the Lights. Listen on for highlights from their conversation, including Mr. Abraham's reasons for casting a British actor to play an American music icon, and the effect that being both a director and a producer on the film had on his problem solving. Enjoy!
So Marc,
Peyton.
I'm going to start with a fun fact. Marc was the first person in Hollywood who actually gave me a job directing a feature, my first movie, Bring It On, which Marc produced. So I want to thank you for that right off the bat. And I remember, it seems it was maybe 5 years ago that I ran into you and said, what are you up to? And you mentioned Hank Williams to me. I don't know if you were reading the book or had started writing it, but I wanted to sort of find out how that first came on your radar.
Well, actually, I was a lifelong sort of country music fan. I've always loved country music, and I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, which is 3 hours north of Nashville. And I used to listen to, the radio going to bed at night, and although Hank preceded me, which I hope is an obvious thing, but I hope. But in any case, I did listen to George Jones and Merle, and then, Willie, and then Chris Christopherson. And I had become, when you do that, you become familiar with Hank Williams because he's influenced them all. They talk about it. The DJs always play a Hank song somewhere in a set. And that's how I got interested in Hank. And then what happened is somebody actually started talking about, I started hearing out there like crumbs of people saying that someone was going to do a Hank Williams movie. And I got really jealous about that concept. And I just said, no, I should do that. And I finally sat down, and that's when we were talking and wrote the script because I didn't know what else to do.
So at that point you found the book?
Well, no, actually what happened, not to contradict you, but what actually happened is I started reading a lot of books. Chet Flippo had written a book, and there's about 30 different books written about Hank. There's a really, really good one out recently called the Hank Williams Reader. But there was a ton of books. There was a lot of stuff on the internet, which, of course, in the old days we'd gone to the library to get, but it was just available to me. I read all this different stuff, and then I came across Colin's book. And then slowly everything else kind of went to the wayside, and I just started using that book. But I wrote the script without actually having the rights to the book. And then I felt honestly that Colin had done such a great job, and it was such a good piece of material, and I had relied on it so much that the right thing to do was to get in touch with him about it. Right. And then I went to Nashville, and I showed him my book, which looked like, I don't know, it was all tattered and dog-eared, and I said and he graciously said, sure, you can base it on that book.
So you tackled, I think, at least a couple of the hardest things you can possibly do as a director, which is to dive into someone's actual real life story, and then also someone who is a singer and a really well-known singer. So I want to sort of leap to the casting thing, because that must have been maybe long before you thought of Tom Hiddleston as you were writing this thing.
Yeah.
That had to have been this daunting thing hanging out there about, okay, I'm going to write this thing. Hopefully I'll get it financed. And then I have to find someone who can, look the part, act the part, and hopefully sing the part. Did you have? How did that process start for you, or how early did it start?
Well, I think I just knew better than to start worrying about it too early. And then when I finished the script, I kind of got it out there, and I started meeting with a lot of the young actors, and they all wanted to meet. And I don't know if I'm not necessarily saying because the script was so great, but they wanted to meet because they knew it was a meaty part. It was so juicy. And I couldn't, and I kept telling everybody from the beginning, because I always said I'm never going to lip sync the movie. And maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's not. But for me, there's been some great movies that have done that, so it's not like that can't be done. But for me, it's always been a little bit of taking me out of the film. So that didn't daunt any of the actors at the time. I don't know if they could have pulled it off, but they were all like, yeah, I can sing. They all told me they could sing. Every one of them said that. Every single one said I can sing. And by the way, all told me they could play the guitar. And I never tried it out, but that's what they said. So, and then I was at the premiere for War Horse. And I was sitting next to one of my former wives. And Peyton knows this. And in the middle of it, I see Hiddleston. And I didn't know who he was or anything, but he was really dynamic in the movie. But I kept thinking, hey, he looks so much like Hank Williams. So I leaned over and I nudged Janie and I said, that guy looks a lot like Hank Williams. And she went, does everything in our life have to get right back to Hank Williams? And so anyway, I sent him the script. I got to his agent and I sent him the script, and he loved it, and we Skyped, and he was really, really personable and magnetic, and he was in his place in London, and he, said he could play the guitar, and Tom's got a lot of pork in him, so he ain't shy about playing. And he got that guitar out, and we talked, and then eventually we met, and I just had this overwhelming feeling when we met. Denise Chamian, who I'm sure some of y'all know, is a wonderful casting agent, and Denise had made me swear, because I'm really spontaneous and I have a tendency sometimes to do things without thinking too far. But when it comes to casting, that's how I like to do it. And I kind of said, she said, swear to me you will not cast anybody as Hank unless they read and you get them to sing. And I went, okay, I promise. And the first meeting we had in person at dinner at the restaurant, and 2 bottles of wine later, I said, will you do the part? And I had no money at that point. I had nothing. And I just said to him, and he didn't believe me. He said, but I want to prepare. And I said, no, I'm saying we'll do it together. If you'll stick with me, I'll stick with you. And Thor hadn't come out. And he plays Loki in the Avengers movies. And he sounds like the King of England when you actually hear him talk. I mean, he's got the, beautiful English accent, legitimate one. And so I at that point, am I going on too long about this? He said, neither one of those movies had come out. So then I told Denise, and she was like, oh my gosh, okay, but he is really talented, okay. And then my friends would say to me, well, who did you cast? And I said, this guy, Tom Hiddleston. And they were like, well, who's Tom Hiddleston? And then Thor comes out, and people went, well, why'd you cast Tom Hiddleston? And then Avengers comes out, and I'm in a restaurant, and people are saying, hey, man, how'd you get Tom Hiddleston? So that's
that's a typical Hollywood thing. I mean, he's such a talented actor. He played Scott Fitzgerald in the Woody Allen movie Midnight in Paris, which is a really small role, but that also struck me like, oh wow, who is that guy?
Yeah,
he's just got such presence and charisma. And I also grew up in the South. I grew up in North Carolina, so I'm a real stickler for Southern accents in movies, and I was really, really impressed with his accent. His whole countenance was Southern to me.
He works so hard on it. I mean, that's the job. It's, I told him, when he would tell me how hard he worked, I said, my father always said, don't tell me how hard you can work, son. A mule can outwork a man. But nevertheless, he did work. He did work really hard. And he lived with this guy, Rodney Crowell. And Rodney Crowell is a kind of a venerated singer-songwriter who tours with Emmylou, and they've won 2 Grammys. And this goes how far Rodney goes. His father-in-law was Johnny Cash, which is, I think, it's hard for me to kind of even imagine. And Tom lived with Rodney for 2 months at Rodney's house.
Oh, wow.
Which I kept saying, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't live at somebody's house. Live in a hotel and go. He said, no, I want to submerge myself. And he did do that. And he also, he obviously got a dialect coach. And I love his script because one page is the script and the other is the whole phonetic Alabama. And because Alabama is different than North Carolina, as we all know. And I'm from Kentucky, and Tennessee's different, and Texas, and they're all slightly different. He was a stickler, so I love that when I tell him you said that, he'll.
No, really, really amazing, and because it's sometimes that can just sink a character, especially Hank Williams. I mean, and then the singing again. I want to talk to you about the process. Were there pre-records, or you did it live, and he did the stuff, or how did it work?
Well, we couldn't do it. I didn't have the dough for starters to bring in a big recording thing and do it all 100% live, because and so as you know as well as I do, and so do you all that you got to cut. So what we did is all those tracks. I love those tracks. At the end, that harmonica and I'm So Lonesome. I was just telling Peyton, that's Mickey Raphael from Willie's band. One of the great harp players of all time. But we recorded all our tracks. Rodney did that. He got the best players in Nashville, and we recorded all that in the round, just like Hank stuff. And then with Tom, we recorded all the stuff live as we could get it. And then he sang to his own playback, except in a couple situations, like when they're singing to the baby. I Saw the Light, that was all live. And in Your Cheating Heart, that's him, and everything else I had to pre-record because I wouldn't have been able to cut it. But the thing is, he's so crazy because, and it was great for me because it was cold in Shreveport, and when we were doing a lot of this stuff, and he would just play the whole repertoire in between takes and keep all the people, all juiced up because they were like this, and then he'd start playing, Hey Good Looking or Jambalaya or something.
All right, so I have to ask you just one more writing question. As you were starting to write the story and deciding on what aspect of his life to focus on, the movie really focuses on Audrey and Hank a lot, and you opened the door when you mentioned your multiple ex-wives. But that really is like a part of the movie is really, it's all about this relationship that has a pretty high level of dysfunction going on. How early on did you land on that aspect of his story?
It was, and I've had a lot of people come at me, different reasons for that, but I made a decision about the way I wanted to tell the story based on certain things I didn't want to do as much as what I did want to do. I never wanted to tell the story from the cradle to the grave because I felt like I knew everything about Hank. I mean, very few people outside of maybe Colin know more than I know about Hank right now. I mean, I really know a lot about the guy, so I knew his whole history. But I've always felt like that there's an element of trying to explain this genius through something that happened as a child. And he was taught how to play the guitar by a great, not a great, but a good African-American singer. But that was not interesting to me because I felt like we could all assume that he had to learn that stuff. And I didn't want to analyze how he became Hank because I personally don't believe that's possible. I always said to people when they would say, and I was talking to people when I was raising money, I said, well, do you want to explain them a little more? I said, well, if you can explain how Bob Zimmerman from Hibbing, Minnesota, whose dad runs a furniture store, becomes Bob Dylan, I'll explain Hank Williams. Because I avoided that. So to me, the thing that I felt people really didn't understand and really didn't know that much about and really believe and am always interested in is the human condition and the relationships between the people in your life, a man, woman, whoever's the artist, whoever's the filmmaker, whatever one may do, is so significantly influenced by those relationships or that lack thereof. And so I, for better or worse, determined that I wanted to show, because every person I talked to that was still knew anything about Hank, and every piece of information I got about Hank was that Audrey had that their tumultuous relationship was a lot of the coal that started the fire for him to write what he wrote. And it's hard to imagine a man writing, "In anger, unkind words are said that make the teardrop start. How can I free your doubtful mind and melt your cold, cold heart?" Because he has such a great relationship.
Right.
So I just dug into that. And also, I guess maybe I related to the fact that he did have a lot of women in his life, and they did have this great influence on him. And I just found that to be, for me, trust the audience that if they see this fire, they don't need to see him with a pencil or a typewriter writing a song. They'll make the connection. That's how kind of I approached it.
And Elizabeth Olsen is fantastic
Right.
in the movie. I think she's an amazing actress all around, but really great. And I think I mentioned to you earlier, there's something about her in this movie that reminds me of a really young Patricia Neal. Like I think of maybe in Face in the Crowd or something like that. But she's
Or
really,
HUD maybe.
yeah, she's really steely and she felt very Southern to me as well in this. Really amazing.
I when I watch the movie, I'm blown away by both of them, and a lot of the actors are so. For me, that's the most enjoyable part, and the most challenging, and the most frustrating part is the actors. But probably the same for a lot of you all. But the thing about Elizabeth that I felt when I first met her, she's a pretty fierce woman, and she's only 26 years old, but she is. I always said to her when I'd see her come, I go, "Oh, the Liz Bird's coming. Oh man," And Tom and I would kind of go, we were both a little scared of her, but the thing that the character, Audrey was really, first of all, you've got a very formidable woman at a time when a lot of women, people weren't interested in that in a woman. That's number one. Number two, there's a history of women in certain bands. I mean, she was kind of Yoko Ono to the band. She wanted to sing. Hank always said, it's hell having a wife who wants to sing, but it's really hell having one who wants to sing and can't. The thing that I think, because she could be construed as a shrew or really bitchy, the thing that I felt when I met Elizabeth and we talked and she was so articulate about the character was she has a real intelligence in her face, which I think, the Patricia Neal thing is really an interesting analogy or comparison. And it's so much intelligence that I think what she conveys, even though she's so rough, is a little bit of like, okay, yeah, I can be kind of, difficult, but how would you like to be married to this guy? And I think that is such an important quality that she was able to convey in a very, very subtle way that even in the last phone call when she hangs up on him and the way she says, "Hun," it's cruel. I got to go. We'll see you later, hun. And it's just like, ooh, there's something about that. The smallest things to me anyway.
Oh yeah, no, I thought the casting just all around was terrific. I'd asked you the woman who plays Bobby, Ren Schmidt. I don't think I'd ever seen her in anything. I thought she was really, really terrific. And there's a scene where they're sitting on the dock talking about, he's saying like, "I love you, but I don't love you like that." And you play it all in one master, which I thought was terrific. I thought they're really great in that scene.
Well, thanks, man, because it is one of my favorite scenes because they're just there. And I was telling Peyton, we didn't have much time to talk about, but he said to me before it came out, "I really liked that scene." And coming from a director and such a good one and a friend, I know he ain't prone to just say that, So the thing about it is Dante, which we probably want to talk, Dante Spinelli shot the movie, who I love and who is hilarious and a great artist. He kept bugging me because I didn't get behind the monitor. I was only about this far from them, but they were so emotional and it was so good. I just said, "We got it." And Dante was on me Dante was, "But Mark, we got to go to the coverage. You're going to need the coverage." And I said, but Dante, I love it. I don't want, and we were so respectful of each other. We never, when we argue, but we would never fight. And I went, I'll never use it. They're that good. Oh, Mark, come on. She's beautiful. Let me photograph her. For God's sakes, what are you doing? Let me do this. For God, let me shoot the woman. So we shot both of them, and it was really good. Of course, it was beautiful because she's great. And Ren is, Reed, Peyton was asking me about Ren, and she's done a lot of television. She's a wonderful actress. So then Dante bets me, which goes to show you one of the worst bets in the world. He bets me I'll use the coverage. He says, I'll bet you you'll use the coverage for the best restaurant in L.A. And I go, Dante, I'm going to cut the movie. What a stupid bet. But I didn't, and you appreciated it. I mean, Dante and I, just to tell you a funny story about the first movie that I ever did, which, one might challenge my commercial taste, was about the guy who invented the intermittent windshield wiper. So I made a movie about a guy who invents a windshield wiper. But Greg Kinnear, he was great in the movie. But I was blocking a scene once, and I felt really confident about how I blocked the scene. And Dante would smoke these little cheroots, the kind of terrible cigars you would buy at CVS. I mean, it was seriously, you wouldn't have a dog smoke them. And because you can't smoke on set, as we all know, he's over in the window, and the whole crew's in front of him, and I finished with my brilliant diatribe about why this scene's going to be perfectly shot and everything's going to be great, and the crew's all going like, "Yeah, Mark, that's great," and everything. And I'm looking, and I said, "Where's Dante?" And they go, and he's over by the window, blowing the smoke out the window. So I shout out, I go, "Dante, did you hear what I said?" "Yes, Mark, I heard." I said, "It sounds good. What do you think?" "Yes, Mark, we do something like that, maybe a little better."
Now, you had known him for a long. You'd produced movies that he'd shot as well, or you have a long-term relationship, or did you first meet on your first film?
No. Another really nice thing. I mean, to digress a second, I love the fact that I'm sitting here with Peyton, and he was so generous and asked me when I asked him to do this, because we always are told about Hollywood being a certain way, that people that don't know about it, that there's not a lot of loyalty or great stories. And the fact that I had met him when he directed his first picture, and now here we are doing this, is wonderful. But I met Dante.
He's not mentioning the $1,000 he paid me to be here today.
That's not that much, really.
Very nice.
I'm going to get Sony Classics to pay. The fact is, Sony Classics, they're so cheap. I had an argument over a $34 rental car in Nashville, and I'm not kidding. Tom Bernard, I like him a lot, and he loved the movie, but he argued with $34. I sent him a text of the picture of the $34. He said, "What? I take cabs. Why can't you take a cab?" I said, "It's cheaper if I rent the car, for God's sakes." But I met Dante when he shot a movie called The Family Man with Nick Cage and Téa Leoni that I had developed and produced at Brett Ratner, who put up half the money with this crazy company. He's got Rat Pack for the movie. So a lot of people kind of looking after each other through a long time, really. That's when I met Dante, and, I always thought he was great. And when I decided to do Flash of Genius, I asked him if he would do it, and he said, yeah.
He's an amazing photographer.
Yeah, he did a beautiful job.
So I have to ask you, too, since you started as a producer and are now directing, do you ever find yourself producing yourself as the director? I mean, because I don't know how much the movie costs, but, it looks fantastic. But how much of that producer brain of yours is working when you're directing?
It's so funny, it's not a lot of people have done that. But, of course, I've studied all of them who did, like the great ones. I'm not saying I'm that, but like Alan Pakula. And it's funny, whenever the press write about me, because they never fail to mention that I had produced. But the way they write about it, instead of using the word producer, they might as well just write it pedophile. It's crazy. They do. It's just so disparaging about, they go like, Marc Abraham, formerly known as a producer, /pedophile. So, I'm a pragmatic guy. I always have been, and how we work together. My job as a producer was to have the best relationship I could with the director and be there as much as I could. And I've always said, when people ask me about producing, I said, a director cares as much. No one cares more than a director about a movie. No one cares as much. You just have to you have to try to care as much as they do, and you'll get their respect. The minute a director feels like you actually don't care as much, that you're just glad to show up, get your picture taken, go on, be on the phone, and be the next one, I said, they're never going to have that same regard. This movie, and I'm really proud of what we did it for. It's an independent film. We did it independently. We didn't have anything. We made it for about $12.5 million, which is not an insignificant amount. But for an independent film we shot 57 locations. We shot 39 days, and we shot 132 scenes.
And it's a period film.
So I was one of the producers of it, and I didn't want to be, but I knew more than the rest of the guys who were producing the movie, so I had to. And so my attitude about it was, kill the producer when it's anything that is a really important creative decision. Do not be a producer. Just kill them, and leave them in the dirt. But when it's about trying to make things, give yourself the most opportunity to get done what you need to do, then inject yourself that way. So be a problem solver instead of, problem creator. And I don't think it's that hard. It's just being decent, really, for the most part, and being respectful of the money.
And how do you, I want to know sort of, because I've never been on set when you're directing, and I want to kind of know what your style is, how you, do you rehearse? Did you have rehearsal time on this movie? How you work with your ADs? How, are you a screamer? Do you have a really bad attitude on set? Are you calm? I'm fascinated.
I've never raised my voice on a movie. And my attitude about it is I always give a speech. I gave a speech sometimes when I was a producer, but in the movies that I've directed, I give a speech, and I always say, we're all the same. I believe that. We know what it takes to make a movie. I said, there's no question that, yes, I will ultimately have the say. I am very sensitive when people have beefs with each other. I can be sitting there and somebody walks past me, and a lot of us are like that because we're about learn about people, and I'll go, what's wrong? Because I'll smell it. And I always say, look, if you got a beef with somebody on the thing, I want you to talk it out. If you can't work it out together, I want you to come to me and I'll referee it. But I don't want people walking around with a big chip on their shoulder. So let's start with that. And then I said, as far as how important everybody is, and this isn't like genius stuff, I just said, but let's be honest. There's going to come a moment when the most important person on this movie set is a person who can get that 49 Ford to run. Because we're all going to be sitting around waiting on it. And nothing I can do, and nothing the AD can do, and nothing Dante can do, and nothing a producer can do. It's that man whose job it is to be, and he's going to feel the pressure, and we got to support that. My way of sort of, first of all, I love working with the actors, but I never raise my voice. I love the collaboration. I like to know everybody's name, and everybody knows me, and we are all open. If I do get upset about something, I have found the most effective way to do it is to make somebody feel bad by calling them aside later and say, come over to like the principal's office, and just say, come to my thing, and make them sweat a little bit if they've acted badly or not really come through the way they promised. And I didn't have to do it very often. But if they've promised and then let the team down, I usually let them know a few hours before I say we're a wrap so they could sweat it. Because my dad used to do that to me, and it was horrible. Whenever I would screw up, and I knew that I screwed up, he'd sit through dinner, and he wouldn't say a word, and I'd just be waiting for him to drop the hammer. And then finally, about 10 minutes, 20 minutes after dinner, he'd say, meet me in the living room. So I'd say, come to my trailer, and then I'd say, look, you gave me your word. You told everybody else you were going to handle this. What happened? Because you let a lot of people down. And I find that most people really feel bad about that, and they don't want to, and nobody wants to be shouted. I never would, as a producer too, I never let, you know that.
It's a very Southern way of running a set. It is. It's like a Southern father, the way the Southern father does. There's a certain amount of shame involved.
Well, that works pretty good.
Yeah. It's interesting you talked about, if people are fighting on the set, I definitely like to have a calm set, but there's a Fellini quote, I'm going to misquote it, but where he talks about, like, if he looks around the stage and there's like one, glowering face, one face that's not into it, it just completely throws him and he has to walk away, because it's such a sacred place when you're on a set. You want to know, particularly as the director, you want to know that you are supported and everybody is fighting for the same thing. And if you get that one face, or those two people they feel like, wait, what's going on over here? It can be so disruptive.
It takes your mind off your business, which is a bad thing. It's like texting while you're driving. It's a bad idea. So,
By the way, I'm not checking my Twitter feed or texting. These are my questions.
I know you're not, because
technology.
we don't want to know what the Tar Heels are doing.
No,
I
I
went
can't
to
check on the
Virginia.
basketball.
He went to North Carolina, and when I was at school, which was obviously before he was, did I ever tell you what they used to say about that? They used to say, "I'd rather have shit on my heel than tar."
I could tell you the many things that we said about Virginia, but I'm not going to do that to you in public on Easter Sunday. I'm not going to do that.
I shouldn't have done it on
You're
Easter
not gonna
Sunday.
do that at all.
You're right. I feel bad about that now.
But yeah, I wanted to also just talk about sort of your preparation and the way you prep for something like this. Do you sit with Dante, or do you go through the script and talk about? Do you do shot lists, or do you board stuff out, or you just kind of go and watch rehearsal, or how do you like to work?
Well, with the actors, I don't like to rehearse the scenes that much, but I love to spend the time with them. And so with Tom and Lizzie, and then Ren and everybody, I always made time to sit down, and we would always have dinner, or we'd go over to my place and we'd sit and talk. And then we might run a little bit about the scene, but we really would get our head wrapped around it. I mean, Bradley Whitford, I don't know if you all, he plays Red Rose. If any of you have worked with Bradley, he's a demented individual, just so you know. He's hilarious, but he is truly demented. And he couldn't believe it, because he showed up. He didn't, he only worked about 7-8 days. We had to scram it all together. And when he showed up in Shreveport, he got in, and I said, well, you're working tomorrow or the next day. And I said, we got to talk. And he's done the West Wing. I mean, this is a guy that, it's not like it ain't his first barbecue. So he knew what he was doing. But I said, no, I really like for everybody to know each other, because then it's just not like, hey, so-and-so. And he said, oh, okay, well, tomorrow. I said, no. And so Tom's the star. He's number one on the call sheet. And I said, and I'd already gotten to Hiddleston. I said, let's go see Whitford at his hotel room. And he was like, what? Because he said, well, I'll come to you. And I said, no, just stay in your hotel room, and Tom and I will be over in an hour. Just get a bottle of wine. He couldn't believe it, but it's so valuable. In terms of my preparation, I really, really like to be prepared. A movie like this, I didn't board much, because, when the movie, I don't even know how Peyton did his movie. All the green screen, the scale, I couldn't even, that's such an overwhelming idea to me. And you would have to, I guess, do more of it, but I didn't board much. The only thing what I do that I really enjoy doing, and because I love Dante so much, is Dante and my first AD, John McEwen, who's a great guy, wonderful. I saw him last night. He came to a screening. To the movie theater. We went through the movie twice together in 2 days. We took every scene, and we had already tech scouted it, so we knew exactly what the location was going to be for the most part. Some of them weren't built, but we knew basically the geography. And we went through each scene, and I talked about how I thought the scene should come down, and then Johnny would just kind of make sure, okay, and then he would start, saying, what do you think, over and above the tech scout, what do you think you need? And then Dante would say, get it in his head. And then the second time we went through much faster, but that probably took a day and a half of just every scene. And then the next day we went through it, and we put a time for how long we thought it would shoot. Now, it didn't always end up how much time.
Got to start somewhere, though.
But we started so we sort of knew how much we wanted to. So at least when I was going through it, I had in my mind that we had allocated 3 hours for this scene. And Dante had in his mind, and by the way, I mean, Dante pulled in two of the greatest camera operators. Had Henry Terrell on the Steadicam and Dwayne Manweiler, who is a monster camera operator. I mean, just about, he carried a camera on all of Michael Mann's movies, and you know how Michael is. He just puts 180 on there and just tells them to go until they drop dead, and then and that's how. And Dwayne was, having those guys, but. That's how I do it. And then so I have in my head what to get done. Maybe that is a little producerial, but it helps me creatively a lot because I can take a little bit of that anxiety out of it.
Yeah, I think it's a crucial thing because it does allow you, it frees up your creative thing on the day. Listen, I think the movie's terrific. I was talking to my mom, who is in her 80s and a huge Hank Williams fan, and it's the songs are so amazing. I mean, they're just they are because I didn't get into Hank Williams until the early '80s, and it was weirdly through Elvis Costello had done a cover of "Why Don't You Love Me Like You Used to Do."
Yeah,
and then there was a band called Jason and the Nashville Scorchers who did "I'm So Lonesome
Peyton
I Could
can
Cry."
write songs, by the way.
But but I then was like, well, who is this Hank Williams guy? And there was a CD that came out in the late '80s or early '90s. There was like a 2 CD set of 40 songs, all the great Hank Williams stuff. And that's when it was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until later that I realized that he did not make it out of his 20s. But the songs are just, they are amazing songs. They just last. They stand the test of time, no matter who sings them. But when you hear his voice, and Hiddleston just knocked it out of the park.
Well, I told Tom, you'll never sound like Hank. Exactly. Don't worry about that. Let's just get close enough. You're an actor. Let's get close enough to the performance, and the audience will cut you the slack because the songs are so good and the tracks are so good, and your voice is really good. He's got a beautiful voice. Let's just try to keep it as visceral as we possibly can. But you're right. I mean, and you all obviously are, know about Hank, or fans, or wanted to know. Or got kicked out of the house on Easter, but the thing is, if you listen to Bob Dylan doesn't give it up to everybody. Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, Leonard Cohen, right? Mentions him in a song. Keith Richards, Tom Petty, Kurt Cobain, Beck. It doesn't matter. Sheryl Crow, Patsy Cline, Lucinda Williams. I mean, they all talk about Hank Williams, every one of them. And, I don't think I realized until halfway through the movie that there was a moment when I was like, oh my God, I'm making a movie about Hank Williams. I'm going to have a lot of people on my ass. But, he's a seminal literary figure of the 20th century. His poetry is men in 1953, 52, when Bing Crosby was big and when other people were not singing songs or writing things that said, I'm so lonesome I could cry. They weren't talking about crying. And he, for some reason, was able to be that vulnerable.
Yeah, it's kind of the dawn of personal songwriting that, in the 60s,
exactly.
Brian Wilson took up and all those people.
That's exactly right.
Congratulations on the movie, Mark. And,
thank you, buddy.
Thank you all for coming out.
Thank you all so much.
Terrific.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Peyton.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this DGA Q&A. You can watch video of all our award season Q&As on our website or our YouTube channel. You can also check out any of our preview podcast episodes from this season. And stay subscribed to The Director's Cut for more Q&As and highlights from other DGA events, as well as selections from our archive. Also on our website, you can explore our visual history program with long-form oral history interviews that delve deep into the careers of veteran DGA members. Check out the program at dga.org/craft/visual history. If you're enjoying The Director's Cut, please subscribe to it on iTunes or our SoundCloud page so you won't miss an episode. And leave us a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. We hope you hear from us soon. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.